Welcome everyone to our webinar today. Today's session is titled Data Center in a Box, and it's being brought to you by Scale Computing and APC by Schneider Electric. Before I hand it over to our speakers today, I do want to run over a few features of the webinar console. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. If you step away or miss any portion of today's session, you will receive a link in your email to review it on demand. Also, we want to get your questions today and have an interactive session. So to do that, you can submit your questions in the Q&A widget on your screen, and that's located right underneath the slides. We'll get to as many questions as we can, and if we're not able to cover it today, we'll follow up with you after the session. We have a lot of great content available for download, so go to your handout section on your screen and look for additional links and files. We also invite you to take part in our attendee chat. That's the section there controlled by the orange icon buttons on the bottom of your screen. So open that up and start a conversation with your fellow IT pros. So to get started, I'll introduce our speakers. First of all, we have Mike Lyon, Product Manager at Scale Computing, and we also have Cissy Walker, Global Director, IT Alliances at Schneider Electric. So with that, Mike, I'll hand it to you to get started.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks everyone for joining us today. For those of you in the Mountain Time Zone, thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. This is going to be great, and we've got a lot of great content. It's also nice to have a co-presenter here, and I think we're going to come up with hopefully some really good questions regarding both, the buzzword we're probably all hearing, which is edge computing, understanding what that's about. We'll talk about IoT, but also the data center in a box concept, and how that can simplify your life, even going above and beyond HCI. Just a quick little bit about me. I've been at Scale for over 8 years. If you're ever following behind me in a car, I'm sorry, because if I look up and see a plane, I'm probably going to weave around and look at it. But really, I spent the first 15 years of my career in IT, and I was always spending time finding ways to simplify my life, whether it was PowerShell scripts or a tool I would adapt. I like to figure out the way to make my life as simple as possible. At Scale, I work primarily on our cloud, managed service provider, and professional services offering. And again, please use the Q&A window, and remember to jot them down as they come up. As the questions come up in context, it's always better for me to write them down, and then we can get to them at the very end. Just a little background on Scale. We've been around since 2008, and really primarily focused on the SMB and mid-market, and providing hyperconverged infrastructure. Even the word was actually coined with us and some analysts in 2009 to try and describe what we were actually trying to put together, because it was so radically unique. But really, it's about simplifying your life, simplifying your infrastructure, really to the point where you've got that kind of cloud-like experience. And the other cornerstone of the product is the support, especially when you're stack owners. It's important to know that when you're going to call a vendor who's responsible for everything, that you've got the support and backup that you need to make sure everything's working as designed. And because of the product we've built and its simplicity and reliability, and regardless of the industry or your vertical, there's going to be a solution for you. And I want to focus on today. Forget about the past. Nowadays most people have all virtualized, and we're all seeing hyperconvergence come to market, and the hypervisor really becomes commoditized to where, whether it's VMware or KVM or Zen, they're really all doing the same core functions, right? It's just the ecosystem that you wrapped around, and the storage and the actual compute power that you're using that really differentiates them. What we're doing today, is leveraging our platform and its simplicity and really pushing towards the edge, which is really just I'll talk about it in a little more detail, but it's I guess an exodus from the data center, if you will. But to focus again on hyperconvergence real quick, it is a basic definition of putting the hypervisor and the storage in one layer, not having a separate VSA, not virtualizing the stand, but really having those in the same kernel stack for a single solution architecture. And that's what hyper-converged infrastructure is, with hypervisor and the compute converged storage. So really, again, as you know, it's all three in one stack, one unified management approach. So we're trying to get rid of the complexity, because that adds cost, whether it's hard cost in having additional vendors, additional support contracts, or soft costs just in the overhead of having to manage those, having to put all those components together, having to update them in tandem or in such a way that you don't violate compatibility. How do you grow that when you need additional resources? Can you do that easily, or is it a rip and replace approach? How do all those components get licensed? The list goes on and on. But really, simplicity. We're going to save some money, right? When you have one vendor to call, one throat to choke, or one back to pat, it's a much easier way to manage your life without having to worry about who you're going to call for one particular problem, and also worry about whether or not you're going to wind up in the middle of a circular finger pointing game. You're not going to have expertise on all those different components in your infrastructure stack, and it's got to be able to grow easily. And technology is going to change, and we need to stay ahead of Moore's law. So when you need to add components to your infrastructure in 18 months, likely not going to be the same processor family. It's going to be Gravy Lake or whatever Intel's named their new architecture. You need to be able to add that without having to rip everything else out and ensure compatibility, without requiring the additional overhead of software licensing, without having to pay to run your hypervisor or pay to unlock features that you really need. And also, can you trust it beyond just being highly available? Do you have backup and DR at the VM and file level built in? So again, simplicity, availability, scalability, and affordability. Those are four basic core tenets of hyperconvergence and what Scale is put together. One stack, not multiple vendors, one interface, providing all of your infrastructure in a cloud-like manner. You've got that private cloud-like experience where all I'm doing is creating my VMs. All I'm doing is creating my workloads, and that's all I care about. I don't want to care about underneath what are the other resources doing, how are they being provided, are they being provided in HA fashion or not. I love one of our founders, Jason Collier. Some of you may have met him or heard him. He's always talking about the RC 1925, which is the 12 networking truths. And I'll work a little bit out of order. But as we think about the edge, these two really are important, because for all resources, whatever they are, you're going to need more. So as much as we all want to cram as much horsepower as we can into a small form factor, there's still some laws of physics we have to abide by. And also, going along with that is one size is not going to fit all. There's not going to be a standard form factor for every edge deployment, because they're all so unique if you really think about the specificities of what those look like. Banks are going to have their own form factors and security requirements compared to a grocery store, right? And that's really where we start to define what the edge computing market looks like and what that really is. This one there. At a high level, it's distributed enterprise. So it's the remote office, branch office concept, really. That's all that's represented today. Especially with manufacturing, medical, and financial as well, where you wind up having almost like the mainframe terminal model, where much of the data is centralized, but really all the processing or creation of that data is done at the remote sites. Much in the same way IoT works. We've got those sensors in our house listening to us and recording us and obeying us, but they're really all feeding into a central Zigbee hub in your house, or depending on who you ask, maybe it's all going up to Amazon. But regardless, it's customized, because you don't have one size that's going to fit all. And it's really creating a micro data center, changing the form factor of a data center from a giant building to something that's mobile, something that is modular, something that's adaptable to the workload or the environment that it's in. There we go, sorry. Timeline on IoT and edge. Obviously, again, this is from one analyst and one guy, but I kind of like the quote where he said at the end of keeping the data center where the data is collected. And that's really what makes the most sense. We really wind up doing a lot of heavy lifting of data back and forth, remote site to branch office to headquarters and back, processing, analyzing, nowadays doing AI and machine learning on it. But that data really should be kept and processed where it's collected. That's what the data center should be. The concept, again, of those micro data centers at the edge is going to replace the raised floor and the data center we have in buildings today. It's being consolidated and made more compact. And just like when we virtualized and went from rows and rows of one use server and one server per app we virtualized, we consolidated hundreds of cabinets into dozens. Well, now we can go from dozens into maybe a handful. That's what's probably going to be happening in the next decade. That's what Threadbird says. I think he's right, but he's got some good points. I'm all about definitions. This one is really somewhat mine, somewhat cobbled together from other sources, but it's pushing the applications, the data, and the computing services out of centralized points, out of data centers, out of large buildings, and out to the logical extremes of a network. And the extreme really can just be a boundary of where your network topology ends. It's requiring that you've got data that's distributed. Maybe it's even fragmented, but it's shared across these distributed networks, across the different sites, regardless of how vast that area may be. So again, pushing all those apps, pushing computing resources out of the data center, putting the computing resources on premises where they need to be, in a sense, a micro data center. So imagine if we could have a data center in that small of a form factor that maybe we could put on wheels. And if you guys have ever come by our booth at Spiceworks, you've seen the early proof of concepts of what we were trying to envision. Part of the reason it's on wheels is we just think about it as an exodus. Everyone is leaving data centers. And 10 years ago, everyone was moving to the cloud, but now they're realizing that that's not going to be the ultimate path. Getting rid of the cost and overhead of running a data center, the expertise, the regulations, paying more in hardware than you need, often doubling down just for DR. And then you're out trying to figure out how to get my remote sites connectivity, how to get them computing resources. There's not an easy path getting from the edge back to the data center. So if we think about hyperconverged infrastructure with IoT and edge, we start to think about the original concepts we talked about before with scalability, simplicity, high availability, affordability. How do we make that work with IoT? Well, IoT is really just doing observe and report. Those are remote sensors sending smaller amounts of data, whereas in edge computing, it's smaller form factors of full-fledged computing resources. Smaller, reduced, resource needs. You aren't going to need to run hundreds of VMs, but maybe you need to run 5. Maybe you're only reporting back a couple gigs of data a day, but it needs to get stored, needs to get processed, needs to get analyzed, and then sent somewhere. And those are our remote sites, or those edge data consumers. They're the ones generating it, producing it, and oftentimes doing the analysis on it. That's, feeding those up into the central repository, and I'm just using the central repository as a generic term, but that's where we get to the big data concept. But all that data is generated out of the data center. It's not generated in one central spot anymore. So whether it's computing resources and workloads like edge data centers or micro data centers would be, or IoT devices. Again, it's all data that's being generated, collected, and often processed remotely. So if we think about the edge and HCI, and we go back to some of those ideas, and I added the word radical because when you're going to the edge where you may not have a computing expertise or be even geographically close resources when there's issues, you need to have something that's simple so that the least common denominator of technology or technologically ability would be able to go and solve the problem. Streamline your deployment time, simplify how much your time you're spending in managing it. Obviously, you have a much smaller infrastructure footprint, lower costs, lower powering costs, and automating a lot of the maintenance that you normally would have to do. Those are things you have to do to get into a small form factor. And you have to have reliability. You have to have high availability. If you throw a one-use server out somewhere, you're only as reliable as the components within, and if there's something wrong with that single stack, then you're out of luck. Not that that's a terrible approach, but that's not highly available. And again, this is where, in order to become HA, we have to start really expanding our footprint, but maybe we don't. And that's where we're getting into the reduced form factors, these smaller size compute resources, where we can have multiples, where we can actually create a cluster in 1 or 2U that has the same HA offering, as it has the same reliability, but without having to sacrifice power consumption, without having to sacrifice cooling needs, having everything built in a reliable method. And just like any remote resource, it's hard to forecast with our IT crystal balls anything beyond 18 months, let's say. I don't know, maybe 24 months. But, the newest and shiniest things often attract our management, and we wind up with projects to scope out or try X, Y, Z, and we have to change. And with form factors and data centers residing in the edge now, we have to be even more cognizant of how can those scale. How can resources that are in that size and form factor grow? Having those options to be able to say, I can add resources, and maybe I don't even need to add compute resources. I just need additional storage. Can I, in a modular fashion, take my cluster and grow it? And then again, this is, affordability. This is part of the reason why we all wanted to virtualize, is to make our lives easier. And we kind of did, but we also changed where we were spending our time and money, from individual servers to expensive SANs and huge hosts, each with their own set of specialization and technology and a whole different way of management. But now that we're really able to shrink the footprint, we can considerably reduce our costs. You're obviously spending a lot less on the iron and silicon that's going out the door, and still able to do the same amount with the same computing footprint and overhead. So obviously that's where we're going to see hyperconverged infrastructure, and then those 4 tenets of simplicity, availability, scalability, and affordability meet in a sensible manner. Because really, this is my definition of edge, and I like to call it containerization of computing. Well, not necessarily what it is, but in a sense, we're just taking the atomic unit of the data center, which is a VM, and putting it in a much smaller form factor. And the only way to do that easily is with hyperconverged infrastructure. It could require a unique form factor that's adaptable, that's changeable, and that's going to suit the environment that it's working in. And then also be able to share those resources across multiple sites. Yeah, I like the containerization analogy. It's the VM, and that's really all that we're caring about today. Just like we're working towards not really caring about a VM anymore, and just caring about the individual services, right? So it's the computing services. Because in the cloud, we're still going to leverage the cloud like we always will, probably, for big data, for the exabytes of data that's stored and generated up there. That's where it's sent and warehoused, where it's stored, cold line storage, or reported on. That's where that data goes. The edge and the IoT phase, that's where the computing is actually happening. The gathering, the data mining, the analytics, as well as how do I get that data from point A to point B? Maybe I just need to send changes. But again, performing those basic analytics, getting that data prepared to be sent and stored somewhere. And again, I'm using data in a very broad sense, and that can be point of sale transaction data, that can be manufacturing output rates, it can be anything. It can be going anywhere. And that data can also be gathered from sensors that are feeding into maybe another on-premises micro data center. And so you have another layer really of where that data, that observe and report cycle is happening. So what our founder loves to say is that in protocol design, perfection has not been reached when there's nothing left to add, but nothing left to take away. And I think that's what we're working towards here is, what have we been able to strip out of the previous 3-2-1 architecture that is able to make our lives easier? And that's how we kind of came to hyperconverged infrastructure. And now how can we condense that? How can we simplify that and make it even easier so that there's nothing left to remove? At some point we have to have the bare minimum, and I think we're really approaching that. But practically speaking, how do we do that when we look at how HCI works? And the traditional approaches by most other vendors is to take the SAN and virtualize it, which works fairly well. It takes the burden of that management out of our hands, but it also comes at a cost of resources. Now, in the data center, when you're dealing with, hosts with terabytes or more of memory, the 20 to 150 gigs you may lose of memory for a VSA isn't going to be significant. But when you're out the edge, it becomes very significant. A smaller footprint, 64 gig like a NOC or something, you're losing over a third of your compute capacity. One of the unique things about us in our storage layer is you don't have to worry about that. So the same 4 gigs, and let's shrink that form factor even down to 32 gigs. But again, as an offering we sell today, 28 gigs. So yeah, we'll do 3 8-gig VMs maybe, but with the other approach, again, you've still got to run that VSA. You've still got to virtualize and manage all your storage, as well as the other overhead that it's managing. You really almost have zero resources left over. Solve that problem, add memory, but again, you're going to start to blow out the form factor, outclassing the size of the motherboard even. So just a quick, easy visualization to say, okay, this is really where it's going to make a difference. And again, flexibility and being able to say, okay, I can create a configuration that's as small as a single node if I don't need high availability, or form factors that are even smaller. And even if I need to use these form factors for disaster recovery or data protection or CDP, if I want to have those replicated, I can break this down into a single node architecture. So again, if you don't really care about HA, and this would be more of a DR option, again, that's where the edge really could come into play. As an edge data center, a micro data center would be a perfect deployment for disaster recovery, especially if you don't need the same equivalent computing resources that you would need in production if you're going to be running in a DR mode. I mean, that's how a good portion of people structure their cloud DR strategies. I don't need to run everything, but I can take a subset of them just to get operating, keep my business functioning. So the data centers, a group of network computer servers typically used by organizations. Yeah, okay. We all know what a data center is. Big building, it's where we throw our servers. Maybe we have one, we've built one. It can be one we're coloing, but the concept is the same. Just as is the definition of in a box. It's something small and rigid we throw things into. But what if you could put those together and simplify it and condense that footprint to where I have all of my needs built into one form factor? A data center in a box. Something that could be 20 U or less. Could have built-in power, that could have all of my required infrastructure stacks all in one form factor. Almost like the VBlock approach, only 1/18 the cost. And I just listed some example configurations here, with APC and NetBots from Schneider, Mellanox switches, and then scale computing. But really the point is to focus on what we've been able to work with APC and Schneider to build out this form factor and this data center in a box concept. So it really is building and creating a micro data center that is scalable, that's flexible, that allows you to grow, but without realizing that you've got to deploy a full data center, that you don't have to worry about coloing somewhere. It's a full data center, really in a form factor that can fit into most, most businesses. So I'm going to transition over to Cissy here, and she can go into a little bit more detail on our partnership and what it is that we're offering with APC.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for joining today. As David mentioned, I'm the Global Director of our IT Alliances at Schneider Electric, APC by Schneider, and in that role, I've had the pleasure to work with Scale and develop these new data center in a box offerings for the edge. So quickly, going back to David's point, how is the edge defined? And certainly everyone, like an opinion, everybody has one. So for here at APC, we look at the edge as primarily on premises. So the compute and storage being generated and consumed and analyzed at the point of getting that data out at the IoT devices, out on the manufacturing floors, the very remote edge areas where you need to compute, but you do not have IT support. Then there's regional edge, which will, I think, grow more and more as the edge expands and that data has to go upstream and go to perhaps a regional center before it goes on to centralized clouds or up to colos and the larger data centers. And then, of course, telco is considered part of the edge in our definition as well. So when we look at the edge and look at the edge environments and the compute solutions that customers are increasingly being asked to deliver, we recognize these attributes as the most common challenges and ask, how can we help solve these? And around space at the edge, of course, physically, it can be anything from a broom closet to a bank branch office. But the space, we ended up looking at needing short depth, shared IT space, mixed use areas. The stack of bananas might be sitting right next to it in grocery stores. And that quite a lot of these solutions required wall mount. The installation, maintenance, and access also became a key factor because at the edge, especially remote edge, very little on-site support. So how can we create something that can be open, deployed, turned on, remotely managed? No one has to touch it. No one has to have IT expertise or licensing to work with that edge deployment. And the demands of the speed, the consistency, the resiliency, being able to remotely access it and manage it. So with all this in mind, we looked at what we could do with Scale and what it would look like. So in the element of our edge compute solution, which became our data center in a box, again, looking at the remote administration, we can do quite a lot around security with our rack infrastructures. So these are some of the things that we decided we would include as options on that. But primarily what we wanted to do was create a data center in a box solution that had the entire infrastructure management controlling and wrapped around a rack. And within that rack, if we needed to include room cooling monitoring, security monitoring, environmental, all the power distribution, UPS, and backup, then the blue area is what Scale would bring to the solution, which was the switching, the compute, their hyper-converged solution, combining the virtual environment and the storage. And then on top of that, if there are third-party vendor applications, then those are applied as the customer needs to. So with Scale, we came up with these reference designs and reference architectures that we can ship fully integrated, loaded, configured, ready to plug and play on arrival. These edge solutions are ideal for small medium business, for the remote edge and edge compute demands. We have the very smallest wall mount racks up to 42U, primarily within edge. It's very rare that something more than 24U is considered really an edge deployment. But we have defined the data center in a box. We have a lot of different routes to market with our global channel ecosystem, so we can work with customer-specific requirements globally. And our joint offer is flexible enough to fit any specific customer needs, but it is certified, standardized, and always will deliver the maximum performance. Oops, I went one too far, sorry. So the micro data centers that APC has in its portfolio and is addressing the edge environment, our original product set was the 24U SX and the 42U SX. These are both our award-winning infrastructures that come complete with the power distribution, cords, cooling, makes it really easy for the channel to sell. And it can be shipped with up to 2,000 pounds of installed infrastructure. So these were a great solution for edge. And we're announcing in a couple of weeks, in addition to this family of rack enclosures, to have a 12U and an 18U version. There is also a 6U version that is a wall mount. It wall mounts vertically so that it doesn't stick out of the wall. And these are ideal for the small edge environments, and they also have extended links from 900 to 1070 millimeters, which accommodates specifically Lenovo and Cisco have some rather long x86 servers in their new portfolios. So we wanted to be sure and address that and have these be able to fit those servers. So anything that scale can deploy on, we can rack up. The CX, this is part of our micro data center portfolio, but the CX is especially attractive to the edge and an especially attractive option when there is no broom closet or there is no IT area. These can actually sit in an office and blend in with the environment. They come in some different wood tones, but the idea is that they can and do look like furniture. They are 98% quieter than the SX, your standard black rack. And so the sound and the cooling capabilities of these make them a perfect solution for sitting in an office environment where there is nothing, when there's just nowhere else to put it. And this has been really exciting piece of, or an exciting solution for our edge, and having this available for folks that do have to set the rack right in their office. So that's the CX version of our micro data centers. And the reason that we can ship them, we have APC by Schneider has a product called shock packaging. So our racks can be stacked and integrated, and the CX is shipped out with special foam padding, the caster lock brackets, and this is another thing that makes them really easy to deploy at the edge without any IT or additional support. For the SX, it comes in a special two-piece removable and reusable cardboard structure with the multi-layer pallet and the foam padding that protect the IT, and it also comes with the ramp. So our shock packaging solutions are another plus and another extra that we have in our portfolio to offer customers who are trying to deploy at the edge. The Schneider Electric software family has our new EcoStruxure solutions for the edge. One of the handouts in the left column is actually a link to our edge computing solution landing page. And the EcoStruxure solutions for edge can include the EcoStruxure management, the security, which is the NetBots services, monitoring of the power, cooling, and our enclosures. It is all integrated. It is out-of-the-box management and diagnostics. It's auto-discovery, system-level performance, and it is a real plus for managing the capacity, the redundancy, your cooling power, and being able to know right down to the rack level remotely what's happening with your edge deployments. And part of that EcoStruxure family product line are the digital services for the edge. Schneider Electric does have remote monitoring through a service bureau, but one of the really key features that is really popular is the Mobile Insights, which is an app that connects in. You can look at your IT assets, it'll alarm you, it will call you on your phone. It's a great tool for you having access to what's going on and being able to manage it no matter where you are. So this again is a great attribute of our EcoStruxure offering. And again, in the handouts, there is a EcoStruxure brochure to tell you all about it. There's a wonderful white paper that we have out where our CTO excuse me, we have a lot of good content around the computing infrastructure challenges at the edge, and of course our solution briefs that we have developed with scale and our reference design. So, excuse me, for the edge overall, our data center in a box with scale, with our versatility from 6U to 24U, being able to ship fully racked, stacked, integrated, and ready to deploy, the resiliency that we can offer with our products and going to market together, we feel like is a great solution for the edge. And if you need to contact me, there's my email. Would love to hear from you. Anything I can do to give you any information, customer-facing information, or information on how to deploy with us and with our solution, more than happy to help, and please reach out to me. Thank you again for your time and for joining us, and I will turn it back over to Mike to take questions and address the question box over there. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks. No, that was great. That was more detail than I was expecting, so I got a lot of that. So this will be, I'm just going to go start from the top. What is the smallest configuration that is this solution available in, and what type of security does the cabinet come with? So as far as computing power, I mean, like I said, you can deploy a 1U scale node or a 3U cluster. Now we have newer form factors that we just announced last week that are actually 2/3 depth. So as far as the security in the cabinet, I'm not sure what the security options are. What would those be, Cissy?
Yeah, I can address that a little bit, Mike. So on our cabinets, we can do swipe card access. We can do sealed cables, and then the NetBots provides closed circuit TV monitoring, alarming, temperature and humidity, smoke detection, water leak. But as far as locking the cabinet itself, we do have swipe card access, if that helps.
Great. Does scale or does APC utilize scale in their own environment? In the Maryland headquarters here in the U.S., yes, they do. In Germany, no. It's not that I know of. But yes, they're a customer of ours, and we're certainly a customer of theirs. And honestly, one of the genesis of the data center in a box concept it came from Doug, who's in our global alliances with Cissy. And then in the EU, there's a large customer we have, a grocery store chain with over 5,000 sites, and they were looking for a form factor and solution. And that's kind of how we had evolved into this. So they took that idea and ran with it. So yeah, short story, yes in the US, not abroad. Okay, so can a scaled data center back up to a NAS that's off-site? Within the next couple weeks, we're going to be announcing a partnership with a backup company that everyone knows. That will allow you to utilize their product to back up to storage devices, whether it's NAS, whether it's cloud storage, whether it's reusing infrastructure in old SAN. So yes, that's a possibility. And now even today, you can export your VMs and have archived copies of those to any CIFS or SMB share. If you still want to have the actual VM level replication with clone and power up in a few seconds, yeah, you still need to have at least a scale node out at the remote site for that. Does it work with Hyper-V and showing limitations versus VMware? So we actually built in our hypervisor, which is just KVM. So we would be, replacing Hyper-V as your hypervisor. Again, I touched on this a little bit, and one of the things we've really seen is that A, with a whole lot of companies adopting KVM, and B, the feature set today, especially with Azure and Hyper-V, then KVM and VMware. At the end of the day, the hypervisors really all do the same thing. It's just the feature set you're using to manage it and everything else in the ecosystem that you have to set up and manage your hypervisor, right? How can edge computing benefit a small 60-person manufacturing company? Well, I mean, that would really just depend on what your infrastructure looks like today and how much you could possibly consolidate it. And if you've got remote sites, or if you just have internally, distributed network, there's ways that we could look at, changing your infrastructure form factor, even if you needed something that would be more, heat or cool tolerant to be closer to your actual manufacturing facilities, the machines themselves, things like that. There's a lot of different ways that it can benefit, whether it's 60 people or 30 people, regardless of the size. That's a great question, though.
And I added on the, someone had asked what was the smallest configuration along with the security, and for us that would be the 6U. That's a new product that we will be announcing at the end of January, but if you want to reach out to me through email, I'm happy to share the prototype information about it, but that 6U micro data center that we will have is our smallest rack infrastructure for edge.
Yeah, and we have a 3U edge config that's around 15,000. That would be, you can fit your entire stack in, with an APC power protection with the NetBots with a cluster in that 6U. So that's a great starting form factor.
All right, well, I think that's about it on questions. If anyone wants to get some follow-up, you can still submit those and we can follow up after today. But again, I want to thank Mike and Cissy for the presentation today. And I do want to offer the thanks to Scale Computing and to APC by Schneider Electric for sponsoring the webinar today. So before we close out, I do want to remind everyone we have a lot of content available for download. So go to that handout section before we finish. Also, we'll be announcing our contest winner just now in the attendee chat. And we'll also have that in our community on the contest page. So again, thank you everyone for attending. We'll look forward to another partner webinar with everyone soon. So until then, stay safe and keep it spicy. Take care all.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Mike.